How much noise?
Have you guys ever heard a bear roar from Robert Redford that loud before?
Oh God, that scene. I just watched that last night, and it's a very strange film to watch after watching our main film, which is Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. It's a little bit of a come down, right?
Yeah, totally. It's called the Hot Rock, but it's definitely a cool off.
Hello, this is Film Trace. This is the podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We are doing, is this what? I don't even know what number this is of our Absurdist Action cycle. Kristen, off the top of your head? I don't know.
It's the penultimate episode of this collection of episodes, and we're talking about the 1970s today. So it's episode 5, one more to go, which we look at the Absurdist Action style, theme, subgenre, whatever you want to call it, pre-1970, which is, I believe, the first time we'll have done that on this show. 2 films from even before the golden age of this kind of cinema. But first, we should make sure to let our guest introduce himself. We're very excited to have him, Dan from the You Talkin to Me podcast. Dan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And if you want to just give a quick rundown so people know, what is the You Talkin to Me podcast all about? I love the concept. I want to make sure people get turned on to it, especially other dads that are movie geeks.
Well, absolutely, and that's how it started. So, the setup is that James and I, my son James, who's a 15-year-old film nerd, I pick a classic movie that he's never seen, and we watch it together. Then we record the podcast, and he sort of gives his view from a 2022 perspective. It's great because I get to be there when he watches Silence of the Lambs for the first time or Psycho for the first time, and it's a great journey. He's obviously loving it because he's getting to see all these films that he's never seen before, but he's heard so much about. So we normally pick films that everybody knows, Casablanca, Some Like It Hot, those sorts of things. It's great, and it's great to share it with him. It's an experience. We look at it as a father and son experience. That's something that we can experience together.
That's amazing. Yeah. Do you? I kind of want to know quickly the response to Chinatown. How did that one go?
Well, I mean, what was great about it is that he didn't really know Jack Nicholson. He'd never really seen Jack Nicholson in anything. Mm-hmm. Knew of him, he's got enough knowledge to know who these people are, but he hasn't explored further back. So watching Chinatown, which kind of blew him away, and actually I hadn't seen it for ages, and I just thought, wow, just a masterpiece. But he's now, there's no... it's not a surprise that the next film we did after Chinatown was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because suddenly all he wanted to do was digest Jack. He just wanted just more and more Jack. It's those sorts of moments, those sorts of sharing that stuff with him. I mean, I've seen these films, obviously, but it's also new to him, and he's absolutely loving it. We don't get to do as many as we'd like, but that's that's one of those things. But we're just enjoying the ride.
Very
Absolutely.
Cool.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I would say the 1970s is. I think that's kind of the big conversation piece I want to make sure we dive into, because that was kind of my revelation with both these movies, to be honest, especially our main film, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, kind of a proto-buddy caper crime movie, but also just like very much indicative, right, of that kind of glow of 70s movies, especially 70s movies with anti-heroes.
Yeah, definitely.
Should we dive in, guys? What did had anybody? This is my first watch, and I think it's your first watch too, co-host Dan, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we did a Michael Cimino movie before, didn't we?
Yeah, a very bad one. Yes.
And so Deer Hunter is one of my favorite movies.
Yes.
And so I was excited to take a look at this just because, what was his earlier work like? This is his debut film. And I was kind of a little bit nervous too. I was happy that I found it for this cycle. I was like, this definitely fits into kind of what we're doing here. But wow, yeah, I kind of expected it to be interesting. I didn't expect it to be, I think, this good, at least in my opinion. I was like, oh wow, this is something I'm gonna have to rewatch, and I kind of wanted it in 4K. Like, it's one of those movies, like, right from the start, I'm like, I gotta go back to this. I don't know about you, Dan. What did you think about it? Have you seen this before?
Yeah. So I guess I think I'm a little older than you guys, but I think I saw this probably mid-teens. I was probably 16, 17, something like that when I first watched it, which was a good age actually to watch this. Considering I don't know. I mean it was definitely something that certainly with the ending and that how the film progresses, it does stay with you. And I know that it would appear that your reaction is as positive as mine. It was great rewatching it. So sort of the first time I saw it, you think it's this buddy heist movie, this crime movie, this action adventure, and then I didn't know how it was going to end. I don't know. Did you guys know the ending before your first?
No idea.
So, when I watched it a couple of days ago, again, I sort of saw it differently because obviously I know what's going to happen. So it becomes more, I mean, it's very much about their relationship anyway, but it seems that it's just this film about the relationship of these guys that just happens to be a sort of crime caper.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, one of the reasons, so I was both excited and nervous about it, not only the Michael Cimino factor, because he had this kind of really almost tragic, rise and fall in Hollywood, but also because, like, I love Jeff Bridges, but I greatly usually dislike Clint Eastwood. Yep. And so I was like, I just wondering how, like, on paper it should work, right? Like, it's a classic combo of, goofy, free-spirited guy and serious, mysterious guy, right? And I was just like blown away about how perfect Jeff Bridges was. Like, I knew, like, I hadn't seen a ton of his early work, other than like Tron, but this is even way before that. And so, like, I was kind of, it was a revelation, even though I've loved him in so many roles in, the 90s onward. And that, like, I don't know, why is that performance like so under, like, it's just not talked about the way a lot of 70s performances are, but I feel like it should be iconic.
But I think there's something about this movie, I don't know what it is, and even doing sort of the research, when we do a lot of these films, especially from the 70s, there's normally like a large amount of background material to go through, like books or articles and all in between. With this one, for whatever reason, it just has not gotten the sort of reputation and sort of respect for whatever reason. I do wonder why. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jeff Bridges, he was nominated for an Oscar for this role, but it feels kind of forgotten. Yeah. I don't know, Dan, do you kind of agree with that? You probably have a different perspective than we do on it.
No, not at all. I think it definitely feels like that. And one of the takeouts from the film after rewatching it was, why isn't this a more well-regarded film? Why aren't people, I obviously mentioned to people that we were doing this, and largely nobody had heard of the film. It's not regarded as a classic. I mean, when you really look at it and looking at it again as a debut film, and that, again, that's quite revelatory. It is something, I think, something quite special. But I mean, and that Oscar nomination as well. So I don't understand really why it's not better respected.
Go ahead.
we're like walking all over each other today.
Yeah.
Do we need to do a synopsis here? If someone hasn't seen it, let's give them like the basics. Do you want to do it?
Right, absolutely. If you have not seen Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and you are for whatever reason listening right now, pause the cast and go and watch it. It is streaming, I believe, on HBO Max. Is that where I watched it? Oh no, Showtime.
Showtime's on Showtime now.
Yeah. So there you go. it is, like we said before, classic Odd Couple action comedy, before action comedy was really a thing. So Jeff Bridges plays Lightfoot, free-spirited drifter. Clint Eastwood plays Thunderbolt, legendary thief who is on the run. I had to kind of do a double take. I almost considered rewinding it. They basically just wind up together because Clint Thunderbolt is literally running away from being shot by the film's antagonist, and Jeff Bridges Lightfoot had just stolen a car and just like magically, it's like one of those like movie magic things, script wise, where he comes across him in the desert and lets him get in his car, and then bam, they're partners in crime. There's double crossing, there's bank robbing, there's it's a road trip movie. It's very much a nature film as well. It's like out in the wide open. It's just as like landscape heavy and Americana oriented as like Easy Rider or any of those films from the late 60s, early 70s. And yet it also is very much like setting the groundwork, right, for this style of film where it is largely a character drama, but with like heavy doses of comedy and maybe 4 or 5 action set pieces. But that was definitely not heard of at the time that I know of. Was there anything else going on in the 70s that had this kind of vibe of mixing together comedy and action?
I mean, there had to be something that we're missing, right? I'm thinking that we're gonna do the Hot Rock later,
right? Which was a couple years prior
to 1972. I think the thing that sticks out to me is it's like a weird, and it kind of goes towards how this film was made because it's kind of bizarre, right? Like you have Clint Eastwood. Kind of takes Michael Cimino under his wing after Cimino helps write Magnum Force in 73. And so I think you have this very standard, powerful guy in Hollywood who plays it pretty straight, right? Clint Eastwood is the epitome of the tough guy, the stoic tough guy, but also a very powerful man in Hollywood now and back then. Taking this, I mean, he's a weirdo, right? I mean, Cimino is just kind of an odd duck. And having him, it's like the entire film is this tension between Eastwood trying to play a tough guy and doing the whole stoic thing, and Cimino letting Jeff Bridges kind of really improv and riff. And it's such a bizarre concoction. And it works because of that constant tension that is going on between this very loose 70s new Hollywood vibe mixed with this kind of old school post World War II Americana star like Clint Eastwood. It's I don't know. I think from my take there, that's the thing that constantly created sparks on screen was that weird tension going on. I don't know, Dan, what do you think? What makes this thing sort of sing to you, this movie?
For me, what you've got is this kind of this unexpected film wedged into this, what is quite a conventional genre piece. And inside of that, there's all these layers. And inside you've got this really interesting, film about the relationship between sort of two guys, really. And that's the bit that the spark comes from, I think. But the way they play off each other and the chemistry between them, everything else really is, whilst it's quite interesting, and I quite like the sort of freewheeling nature of it, and that for me was the key. Is that it's not what you expect. Okay, we're going to go and watch this sort of comedy action caper film, but actually what you're getting is something quite layered.
Yeah, I think the layered aspect of it is something that is missing a lot. Like we already talked about in the previous episode what happened in the 1980s, right? And Eddie Murphy and Shane Black scripts. You still have arguable arguably a layer to it, but it's very much still like kind of light in nature. Like you could very easily watch 48 Hours of Lethal Weapon and not really come away with anything more than I was entertained.
Yeah.
Whereas Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, that's part of that 70s kind of classic vibe, right? Is that not only are you getting entertained from, you know, opening credits to closing, you're also like really like living with these characters. And so it never feels like shoehorned or forced when there is a like sentimental emotional moment between them. You know, even the slightest things. You were talking about the tension and how that creates sparks. Like that's literally what chemistry is on screen. And you're seeing it from when Clint is calling Jeff Bridges kid, in an endearing but also kind of like what's wrong with you kind of way. And also Jeff Bridges just being so open, and his infectious laugh that you know, he still does to this day on screen. And you have that juxtaposition, but also like these moments. I remember us talking about this when we were talking about 70s cinema for the last cycle, Dan, existential thrillers, William Friedkin's Sorcerer, which I've become obsessed with.
Yes. This movie makes me think of that a lot for some reason.
Yeah, like there's very little comedy in Sorcerer, but it very much like plays that genre piece straight that you were talking about, other Dan, where it's like you're very much expecting just like, you know, a good yarn, like a well plotted, like action story, but you end up getting like these small moments that end up adding up to the point where you're like, oh, that really like made me think about friendship, made me think about like what it means to have accomplished something. Like that little speech that, you know, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched Thunderbolt, please do once again before you come listen to the rest of this. But as Jeff Bridges is, you know, coming to his final moments, Lightfoot is very much kind of reconciling the whole idea of being a criminal, of making a lifelong friend, as he's on his deathbed in this car in Big Sky Country. It's just like so, like it I don't know, put such an imprint on me. I'm just like I had thought for so long that this was just like a, you know, another long line of Clint Eastwood movies that might have its moments, but wouldn't really like get in my feels. But I very much did. Did you, Dan?
Yeah. I mean, this is awesome, Cimino. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you notice it even, I can't remember, it's right in the beginning. There's a very, very long take of them just driving a car next to like a pond or a lake, and the way that he sets up the shot. And we all know he's a perfectionist. You know, Heaven's Gate obviously is his infamous film, and you know, failure at the time, but I think has been completely revitalized as sort of his masterpiece. He adds so much to this film, and it's funny hearing these sort of onset conflicts that he had with Clint Eastwood, because Clint Eastwood, and we can see this now as a director, even in the last decade, Clint Eastwood is workmanlike, right? He gets in, he gets the job done. He obviously values art and acting and directing, but he views it as a job. And you can tell that in his style and his philosophy of filmmaking. And you could tell it back then in these on-set reports where, you know, basically Clint Eastwood would be like, you got 3 takes, that's it, then I'm done. And he would fight with Cimino about this, and Cimino would want to do one more. And this is his first movie. And what's so fascinating about that part of it is, even when Cimino is up against such a strong authoritative figure like Clint Eastwood, who not only is big back then, but got him his break to do this movie, he still gets out sort of the magic of his like the magic of the first hour of Deer Hunter, which I could watch over and over again. It's just these beautiful natural shots that ground the sort of the human drama in something much, much bigger. And so that's why, you know, when you talk about that final scene where, you know, obviously it's melodrama, but it doesn't feel melodramatic.
No.
For some reason, it feels gritty, and kind of, it feels real in a way and authentic in a way that most movies can't achieve. But it's just, Cimino here is really finding his footing as, I think, a great artist. And then you could say whatever you want. Like, it's funny when we watched Desperate Hours. What was that, like season 2 of this podcast? Like maybe a couple of years ago. There were shots in that too.
Oh yeah, there's still
gorgeous
glimpses and performances that he's able to get out of like really, actors in their in their prime, but with like just a dreadful script.
I mean, the one thing that I think, Dan, you kind of hit on, and I kind of want to explore a little bit more, is like how do you balance a genre work like this could have been a very typical sort of heist, and I think the hot rock would fall underneath this. A genre work, it's just straightforward, hit point A, point B, point C throughout the plot. How do you think he was able to do that, be successful at that, but also get this sort of loose hangout vibe, almost meditation-like vibe to the movie? I mean, how do you think that he did that?
I mean, from my perspective, it works best because it's a writer-director. I don't think you get, it's his material, he's directing. How else can you, in somebody else's hands when it's not their own creation, how do you balance those moments of tenderness with, that action sequence? And it is a tightrope, act. It's that difficult to do. And we know films, I'm sure, that try and fail. But the fact that you've got, quite moving parts and then a bit of slapstick or, an action sequence to balance that, I think you can only do that when you're so devoted to it because it's your own material.
Does this film remind you guys of anything else? Does anything come to mind? I mean, does this, what often gets stated and kind of looking through the notes and stuff is that, like, well, this movie got made because it was part of a road movie thing that was going on in the late 60s, early 70s. Easy Rider comes up multiple times. Does this feel indebted to Easy Rider in a lot of ways?
I mean, I think that's a fair question. I also feel like the reason that maybe Cimino was able to ingratiate himself into Hollywood so quickly and effortlessly was because he, like you were kind of saying before, he's kind of a grab bag. Like, he's not a guy that you can easily pin down. And I wonder often if Clint was like a different guy in the 70s, because he still had a lot of the same characteristics that he has now. Like, he was still like working constantly, super prolific, both as an actor and becoming a director, and yet he had to kind of be, he's younger, and he has like more, like, this is the guy that ends up 4 years after this doing Every Which Way But Loose, and like thinks like doing a movie with a chimp is a good career move. And so he had to have some kind of spontaneity to him, or at least an appreciation for others that could be spontaneous, that could be kind of freewheeling, is the word that UK Dan used earlier, that I think is just so perfect for this. I did want to make sure to take a moment to mention how one of the reasons that I loved this movie so much is perhaps because it reminded me of my literal favorite movie that didn't come out for 20 years later, Bottle Rocket, Wes Anderson's debut.
Oh, yeah.
And like that chemistry, that juxtaposition between Eastwood and Bridges, between specifically those two characters, not those two actors, but those two characters, in so many ways felt like the chemistry and juxtaposition between the Wilson brothers in that movie. And it's also like about like, small time criminals, just like not just, not really knowing what they're doing. And that kind of adds to the comedy of it all, but also just like them. Like the character of Dignan, which I literally named my firstborn son after, had that kind of feeling of like pulling off a heist is something to be accomplished. That's like part of a plan, and part of like, how do I feel like I've done something with my life? And that's like what Lightfoot is to a T, right?
Yeah.
So I think that while maybe there's not a lot there's some indebtedness because Cimino is just like such a grab bag, there's also so much so much threading from this movie through this kind of subgenre, this idea of like the action comedy of like criminals as lovable goofballs kind of storytelling that was just such a fun surprise for me.
Is there anything, I was kind of following this as I went through it, thinking about those road movies and like the time period where it felt like most of the auteurs and sort of artists who wanted to say something had something really political to say. Easy Rider being a perfect example of this. An indie movie shot for next to nothing that, you know, basically was maybe you'd view it like a polemic on some level. Do we feel like there is an undercurrent of sort of political criticism in this film? I feel like it sort of at various points kind of peaks its head above water every once in a while. Did you guys feel that at all, or is this more rooted in sort of the heist genre, buddy film, and sort of male friendship and companionship? Where do you sort of fall with the political aspect of this?
UK Dan, why don't you take this one first, because I've got to chew on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a relationship film. You know, it's not a stereotypical story of certainly male friendship. So that's something that I think is really kind of looked at quite openly in the film, where perhaps that could have been completely ignored. So yeah, I don't know necessarily politically, but you know, my take on this is, you know, here is somebody trying to do something different with kind of the man, with you know, 70s male, 70s American male. That to me is what I took away from it. You know, there's quite a lot to be said about, you know, the men in this film, the four sort of main guys, in terms of, you know, I don't know, from anything, you know, I don't want to get into it too much, but, you know, how women are treated in this film, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, I think that's quite overt. And, you know, and it's quite an interesting way to look at it at a time, you know, it's sort of mid-70s, when there's lots of films being made where, you know, sort of action movies where it's just, you know, it's not being considered, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
100%. Chris, what do you think?
Well, the probably most interesting like autobiographical element of this, which ends up being political, was, you know, Cimino had this kind of really nasty rumor as his career was unwinding, and even through to like his last decade, before he died in 2018, 2017, of whether or not he was transitioning from male to female. And I mean, you literally, like, this is his debut film, and yes, you've got like all the questionable misogynistic stuff, which is very much of its time. And then the end of the movie, like the last, or not the last, but like a good 30-minute portion, Jeff Bridges is in drag. And he not only, but it's like not played for laughs the way that like,
it's not at all.
Like you know, the early SNL or anything like that. It's very much like he straight up like looks up in the mirror and says like, "Wow, I'm like, I look good." Like, and that was also kind of refreshing, especially because the beginning of the film is so like macho, and but even like those moments where like they bring the girls back to the hotel room, but then like I was not expecting a 1974 film to have like a very minor, very kind of disempowered female character be like, drive me home or I'm going to go out and yell rape. And then she actually does it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just, it shows that like, while maybe he wasn't as overt about it in interviews, he was also kind of very much seen as a guy that, Cimino was wanted to let his films speak for themselves.
Yes, yeah.
And yet like it's so chock full of that kind of identity politics that you can't help but just like see see that happening over the course of his career. I also wanted to quick mention that one of the few things that he did say, or that a lot of people kind of took from the few interviews he did during the 70s, was that he saw his first three films as a sort of spiritual trilogy, which say what you will about, like, you know, calling three random films in somebody's filmography, but I actually want to think about that now. I want to rewatch Heaven's Gate, and maybe rewatch Deer Hunter, even though I've seen it a bunch. Where it's like it's a really interesting kind of thought experiment about what kind of, we use the word Americana a couple times. Like, you do have three very different views on essentially, something very similar, which is like the idea of what it means to be an American man, the small time criminal, the big time veteran, and the like westward empire kind of profile. And I think it could work. I'd have to rewatch all three, but yeah.
That's a lot of work. That's what I haven't said. Yeah, I mean, there's something that struck me while watching this, and this is not just about this film necessarily, but just sort of these road films and buddy films of the 70s, where there's just this inherent rootlessness about these characters that feels so distinctly American. The fact that they're constantly sort of changing their identities. There's some line or Clint Eastwood was basically, if you don't know what to do, just keep moving forward, just keep moving. There's something just the fact that you can go from town to town to town back then, before the internet, before even cable TV, and no one have any idea who you are. There's just something about that where that's all gone now. Essentially, you could never do anything that they're doing in this movie and to the same effect. You can't just get in a car, go to like an hour away, and no one's going to know you, can't find out about you, right? Which is sort of a very fascinating world that is, you know, for the most part was a kind of just a moment in time. But I think that this film really captures that openness of the American West, which you know has faded dramatically, which also kind of makes the film special because it feels maybe like a time capsule to that one moment in, you know, America's history where things were really open and there was an ability, you know, it's kind of the American dream to kind of be whoever you want to be, and you're always thinking about the future and the past never existed, right? And that's kind of how these characters are acting, and it's always about the next big score. Oh, if I just have money, then, right? All these sort of, you know, hyper capitalistic. And they're all committing crimes constantly. Like, it's not even a thought about committing a crime that it's wrong. Yeah. Never does that once come up, right? And that's also a very an American sort of concept of just being like, well, the money's out there, I need to go get it, you know? I don't know. I love that aspect of this film, and it really struck to me a very specific kind of Americana tone, especially from the 1970s. What's interesting too about this movie, and I wanted to bring up, is that it did perform actually well. So we kind of talk about it as like maybe it's a little bit lost. It's kind of forgotten. You know, it was only filmed for, you know, what was it, $4 million back then, and it eventually did 25 million total, which would equate to nowadays $150 million at the box office. That's a lot. Like, that is a lot of money, and it was a top 20 movie of 1974. But the bigger question is, kind of going back to where we started, why? Because of its financial performance, it did pretty well. Clint Eastwood was not happy for a couple reasons. One, Jeff Bridges outacted him, and got nominated, and so he was pissed about that. And two, the initial box office run was okay, and ended up doing, back then it was roadshow type stuff, so they would open it up city. So it eventually did very well, but he was not happy with the initial box office run. So it's successful, I think, critically, and I think from a commercial perspective, very successful. You know, what has happened over the last 50 years that has caused this movie to be kind of forgotten? Is it Cimino's sort of crashing career after Heaven's Gate? Is it a little too strange for most people? I mean, why do we think it is sort of just dissipated. And Dan, what do you think?
I think some of it is the Cimino element, and obviously none of which is his fault, really. So I think that, you know, if we were sitting here and it was a Scorsese film, obviously, you know, there's a rich back catalogue that everybody knows every single film. You know, I think that it's not even necessarily those people that are, you know, sort of fans of this film. It's not necessarily viewed as a Michael Cimino film. It's a Clint Eastwood film, isn't it? It's a Jeff Bridges film.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, I do think that its uniqueness is probably another reason why it gets sort of put aside. Do people want to talk about it? Do people want to deal with it? There's some things going on in this film which are unique to the genre. Certainly in that period. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, and watching it again, and you, as you've said already, Dan, watching it, that is the thing that you start thinking about relatively early on, because if you're along for the ride and you can't help but really like these characters, especially obviously the Jeff Bridges character and his performances, you know, you can't take your eyes off him. But you know, all of that together, it's a question mark, isn't it? Why don't we talk about this film more? There are some shots in this film which are, you know, I mean, it's beautiful. Some of it's amazing. Yeah, and the performances, you know, I mean, if you were talking about Jeff Bridges, would you talk about his Oscar nomination for Thunderbolt and Lightfoot? Probably not.
No, yeah, you wouldn't. It doesn't come up.
Right. Even though, like, when he does a big performance and even a mediocre movie like Crazy Heart, you have people like talking about like how he deserves, like he just commands the screen even when the script is lacking. And I mean, I think I would just to be a little more objective. I was very much smitten with this movie, but I did get kind of a little annoyed with some of the plotting, and I think that's part of the critical response to the film back then. Also, like, just to go back to the commercial piece real quick, yes, it was top 20 film, but like it was a Clint Eastwood movie, and so people expected it to be like top 5, top 10 of the year. And I think there was also that friction. Like Clint also had friction not only with Cimino but also with United Artists.
Yeah.
Because he gambled big on getting this guy in the director's chair, and United Artists didn't really want to put a lot of promotion into it. And so I think there's something about it where it's like, you know, whose movie is in it? It's like you've got not only two of the hugest actors, you've also got this really brash debut guy. Like that makes for a perfect like film geek movie.
Yes. Yeah.
But populist, I not quite. And also, going back and forth, but the plotting, it shouldn't matter because it's such a, you know, character relationship movie. But it is like I really got stuck in that third act where it's just like, okay, you did the score. Why are you going to the drive-in? Why aren't you just like skipping town? That's like that
part
just
of the plan, Chris. No, I totally get that. Yeah, there's something. I think at the end of the day, to me, it's like it was that conflict between Cimino and Eastwood and Bridge. Whose movie is this?
Yeah,
you know, that's really what I think. Because Dan, to your point, I think it got, you know, this is kind of labeled. I guess it's an Eastwood movie, right? But it's not. It's absolutely not at all. It's a Cimino movie through and through. Like, this is definitely his baby and his work as the writer-director, and Jeff Bridges showed up and put on an amazing performance. And Eastwood, I think, does okay. I think he gets lost a little bit because he doesn't really know the vibe and how to play it, but he doesn't have to. He just plays the stoic dude, and he's fine with that. How do we then compare this to our chaser film, The Hot Rock? Which I think I picked this, didn't I? We both picked it.
I was all about this one,
yeah.
But I mean, you went along with me, and just like full disclosure, like I have an affinity for this movie, but mostly just because I sought it out at my local library when I was a teenager and got really into Sleater-Kinney, Seattle band that named one of their albums The Hot Rock, and they they did a take on the poster for their album cover there. So
such a music nerd.
Yeah. So that's my baggage. But had either of you guys seen this one?
Dan, go ahead. Have you seen this?
No, I hadn't. I heard of it and knew the book, but again, hadn't read the book or certainly seen the film. In fact, I didn't even know it was I didn't even realize it was a William Goldman script until it came up on the screen.
Yeah. I had never seen this before, never heard of it. Just doing research for, action comedies and going back, trying to find stuff in the 70s, and this thing popped up. And I'm thinking, Robert Redford, George Segal, Peter Yates, I was not super familiar with. What did he do? Bullet, I think?
Yeah.
Before this, which I've actually never seen.
It's a good one.
So I don't know how to compare it to that, but watching this almost right after I watched Thunderbolt and Lightfoot was really tough. Just because I think, this definitely works within the absurdist action cycle that we're doing. It's a kind of Ocean's 11-esque heist film about a diamond they have to get, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. It's about the heist, it's about pulling off the heist. And in this one, there's many different heists.
Yeah.
Right? There's like 4 or 5 at least. The thing that blew me away about this was, and this is my opinion, my viewpoint, I don't expect anybody to share this, how little the comedy works.
What?
I mean, it just, there's so many moments, and I couldn't stop thinking about this because I watched it last night and I woke up thinking about this. Why is it, for me personally, the moments that should be absolutely hilarious just fall so flat to me. The moment Seal gets stuck inside the diamond case.
Yes.
First night. It's like that should make me laugh and make me feel like, oh, wow, this is fun. Then I couldn't get over how flat it felt. And then the landing on the wrong roof for the helicopter police thing heist. Again, Chris, you gotta fill me in, buddy. Like, what am I missing here? Do I have no sense of humor? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, basically. I don't know. You were laughing a lot when we watched Day Shift last weekend.
A great movie, Netflix, the original.
But I don't know. We started off the show talking about I would agree with you. It's a definitely cool down. But I mean, I think that's part of the appeal, right? Like even down to the promotion for this movie, even though it did fall flat, it was a flop.
Huge flop, by the way. Huge
flop. But that kind of chilly machismo of these characters, which once again juxtaposition, not necessarily with each other because they're all kind of like losers, but that juxtaposition of them, just especially Redford, he just oozes cool, and yet he gets in this absurd cyclical making mistakes crew. I think that's part of the charm of it. It's not necessarily a laugh out loud. It's very different from the kind of comedy you'd end up getting in Ocean's 11 or any of those types of later films, because it's this almost it's absurdist ultimately, right? That they, and you're supposed to think that they aren't really thinking things through, and yet they're most concerned with how they look doing it, and whether or not you're going to do a favor for your brother-in-law. And I think that's, I don't know, it works for me because it's an ensemble piece, and I treated it much more as a comedy than as a heist movie. Soderbergh tried to kind of invert that, right? Make it ultimately a heist movie, but with some cool comedy on top of it. This is ultimately a farce at its core, I think. And I mean, you wouldn't have George Segal or the guy who plays the bomb maker. I think he's great. He plays that kind of role where it's just kind of, I guess that's the link to Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. It's they're goofballs. They don't know what they're doing, but you can't help but like them and wish that they somehow pull it off. What do you?
Dan, what do you think? You gotta settle this for us.
Well,
Not to put you in the middle, but I just put you in the middle.
I mean, to me, I think farce is a good way of describing it. I sort of came at it. I was thinking it was more of a light-hearted. I didn't think it was going for out-and-out comedy. I don't think they were trying for out-and-out comedy. More of a, they're just sort of crazy guys. Get the crew together and everyone's a little bit wacky in their own way, and all those sorts of things. So, I mean, I did enjoy it. I didn't know much about the plot, so the fact that we were watching a heist movie and the main heist was kind of 25 minutes in, I was like, excellent, this is all going to go horribly wrong. So I really enjoyed the trip, and they're all fine in it, but I wasn't disappointed because I was expecting it to be funnier, if that's what we're saying.
When you say fall flat, Dan, you think that do you think that there was like potential here that was squandered, or like, I'm just wondering?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, I think there's tons of potential in that. That's the thing that I kept racking my brain around. It's like, why doesn't this work? Why doesn't this spark to me? Because you have Robert Redford, you have George Segal, which are two perfect leads to play off of each other. But it just doesn't, even from the opening scene where he's walking out of the prison and Segal's in the car and he apparently doesn't know how to drive because he stole the car.
Okay, yeah, I'll agree with you on that one.
It just sort of like, great. It's like the tone, and I think the tone's all over the place. And I think that's the thing. If it meant to be a comedy, it needed to turn up the laughs just a little bit more, make it more jovial. But it had that weird sort of naturalistic 70s crime film thing going on where it's trying to be sort of gritty. I don't know. It felt like it was in no man's land between like a heist movie, an action film, and a thriller, and kind of, just a fun romp. Because I like those scenes where it should be hilarious, for whatever reason, just seems like, oh, and then he got trapped under the case and they start running around from the police. It should be hilarious. Like the way that they're running around from the museum guards and stuff like that. It should be funny, but for some reason, to me, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the characters. I mean, one of the things too is like, that stood out to me is, and this is going to sound probably dumb, but I'm going to say it anyways because I don't care. What's the motivation of any of these characters? I always say this, and I'm like, I always go back to screenwriting basics, but it's like Robert Redford. Like even in like an Ocean's movie or a comedy like that, it's very clear why they want to do what they want to do. And it's a Robert Redford. What is his motivation? Oh, my heart's not in being a straight dude, playing it straight, that's what he says in the opening, right? Is that it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I get that kind of take on it, because if you're going to be a comedy, like those signposts should be more obvious, but because it's got that kind of like you said, that cool naturalistic vibe. I mean, it's Yates. That's why some people can't get into like Bullet, because he is known for being a spare kind of director, especially like within the bombast of typically the genre. And I saw that you put that in your notes, right? Is that like he was kind of over this early 70s explosion of drugs and violence and sex in cinema, and so he kind of pulls that back and still manages to make a movie about criminals. And I think that there's moments that just work for me really well because of the actors involved. I think Redford really does sell this kind of like, he is out of jail for like one of the multiple times he's been put in jail, and that's like that running joke, right? Is that he's just destined to repeat that process, and so it's got this kind of like existential element to it. And he does have this moment where he kind of just like rolls his eyes and he's like, "Yeah, this is what I do," and it's like this Sisyphean absurdism that maybe it just speaks to me, and because I've got my own issues, but he really feels like perfectly suited to go along with this ride, whereas like the other guys are a little less a little more blind to like the inevitable getting caught and things going wrong. And so that juxtaposition works for me too. I do think that there's probably something going on here with like the translation from novel to script that is lacking. Apparently, this is a huge character and big crime writer, Donald Westlake, and the character of Dortmunder that Redford plays. That I don't know. You had mentioned the novel too, UK Dan, but did you feel like there was something going on here that, unlike a lot of these original scripts like Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and then even going into the 80s with this kind of genre, 48 Hours and Lethal Weapon, it's kind of like that. Is there like a strange no man's land like Dan's talking about?
I think with this one, there's no character development going on, is there? I mean, it's. I think I don't know what the book's like. I think that Robert Redford's sort of just playing Robert Redford. There's no it's not very deep, But I think it's successful as a caper movie. I think it works for it's designed as this machine. It's a caper film. Go and watch it. You'll be entertained. People's motivation sort of overlooked, isn't it? But not hugely deep, but entertaining nonetheless. I mean, I did come away from it. I thought it was really good, but whether you get, I don't know. I was interested in. I might try and sort of look into this a bit more, but I was interested in the difference between the novel and the script, essentially, because I felt like it was a very, very much sounded very much like a William Goldman script. There were aspects to it, there were absurdist aspects to it, and I wondered if they were in the book. And there's some neat ideas. There's a lot of good. There's some funny ideas that perhaps, like you say, Dan, are not entirely explored to the fore. But I think for what it's trying to do, be a piece of entertainment, it works, and I don't think it's necessarily supposed to be that deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's very fair, and I think the thing that does work for me is just this the inability to get this diamond, and like the escapades that happen. There's something about it here where in another film it would feel and more slight, but here it does kind of reach a sort of existential level of like, how are they ever going to get this?
Yeah.
It's like it's this it's the thing always, and I think Clint Eastwood says this in at the end of Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Let's see what's over the next mountain. It's like, what's over that? It's always going towards this thing, this this idea, this concept, this dream that you can't ever quite catch. And obviously, that's the diamond here, right? But yeah, that does work because the amount of times that they have to set up a heist, figure it out, go through the gauntlet each time of doing this, it does end up having this effect where the comedy is more, it's at a higher level than just hijinks. There's almost like a sort of tragic comedy to it. Like that they're never going to get this and no one's ever going to get what that thing is. And that's kind of okay, right? There's sort of this realization that, the dreams that you have, the things that you want are just kind of unattainable. But you're going to keep trying even to get them, even though you know that it's kind of unattainable. And I think that's probably a little bit of Robert Redford's character here, but he gets it in the end. That's why it's a comedy, right? It ends in a marriage, so to speak. I don't know. I think for me, it's just sort of like that. All that stuff works on a high level. It doesn't work within the scenes itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. I think I do. I did want to make sure to note that one of the things that works most for me in the film is actually not one of the main four guys, but Moses Gunn as the guy from the fictional African country that hires them.
Yeah.
Every scene where they come back to him and he just gives them this like death stare of like, how did you guys screw this up again? I mean, it's that part is broad. And I think, the guy is great. He's known for the Shaft movies, and I'll always remember him from my childhood because he was a Never Ending Story.
Yeah.
That is just like, that is what I think has made this movie stuck with me the most over the years. But I think all this analysis is fair game, and yet still like Dan from You Talkin to Me points out, is so much of this genre, unlike the existential thriller, and arguably also unlike the self-aware horror stuff that we were talking about when we revamped the show, like it's ultimately entertainment, and it's supposed to be kind of just breezy, and like this is kind of the beginning of that, I think. And I think that there weren't a lot of filmmakers trying to kind of have that balance, especially in the early mid 70s. And so I think that if we're talking about like Thunderbolt and Lightfoot being underrated in terms of its legacy, I think Peter Yates is too. And I think that it definitely deserves some reconsideration, even if it doesn't wholly work.
Okay, yeah, I'll allow that. That seems okay.
Compromise, okay.
We'll compromise a bit. If like Thunderbolt and Lightfoot needs, like, what does it need? Criterion Edition? It does.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely needs a Criterion. I need to see that Criterion spine on this movie. And the fact that it doesn't is just mind blowing to me. Hot Rock, I don't know. To me, I obviously have a very different opinion of the film than you do, Chris. There's definitely stuff to value and cherish in it, but I think to me it just feels slight.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it feels like a little bit of a relic, and it feels very dated in a lot of ways. But that's just my take on it. Dan, what's your final thoughts on sort of Thunderbolt and Lightfoot and the Hot Rock? What do you think?
Absolutely, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot was just a dream to watch again. I really, really liked it. In fact, it's one of those. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think I'd even forgotten it. Really, I hadn't considered it for a long time. Even though, back then when I first watched it, I would say it did have an effect. It was an effect. It was an effective film. I did take stuff away from it. Obviously, the end I'm talking about. I mean, I won't think about the Hot Rock tomorrow, but I will think about Thunderbolt and Lightfoot tomorrow.
That's great. I love that.
Yes.
That's a good summary of the situation.
Yep.
What do you what's coming up on the podcast? Any new episodes coming up soon?
We're due to record. We're doing Badlands next.
Oh yes.
No way.
So another film that James is very aware of, but has never seen, and so yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing that one.
That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate you being on the show.
My pleasure.
This has been Film Choice.